Okay, so when I say major American wars, what pops into your head? The Civil War, right? World War II, Vietnam, for sure. But there's this one massive global conflict where America's role often gets, well, kind of overlooked. A war that literally changed everything for the country and for the world. We're going to dig into why World War I is so often America's great forgotten war. It really is a fascinating puzzle, isn't it? I mean, this was a conflict that involved millions. It completely redrew the world map, and it basically set the stage for the entire 20th century. So why does it kind of linger in the shadows of American memory? Well, the answer isn't simple. It starts with the fact that Americans never really agreed on a single story about what it all meant. Historian Jennifer Keane just hits the nail on the head here. Unlike other wars that have these really clear narratives, saving the Union, fighting fascism, World War I's whole purpose and its lessons were up for debate from the very beginning. And that debate, it started right at the top, inside President Woodrow Wilson's own cabinet. So before America even jumped into the fight, there was this profound disagreement brewing over the nation's future. And it was playing out between two absolute giants, President Woodrow Wilson and his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan. And listen, this wasn't just some minor policy dispute. No, this was a clash of two fundamentally different ways of seeing the world. And the breaking point, the moment it all came to a head, was in 1915. A German submarine sinks the passenger liner Lusitania. All of a sudden, this abstract war way over in Europe became very, very real for the United States. And it forced a crisis that would end with Bryan's dramatic resignation. A huge deal. 128. Just let that number sink in. That was the number of American citizens who died on that ship. Suddenly, the war wasn't just over there anymore, it was personal. And it forced this monumental question on the country. How should America respond? And this event just split the administration right down the middle. On one side, you had Team Bryan. Their thinking was, look, we're safe, protected by two giant oceans. The goal is simple: cool things down, de-escalate. But on the other side, Team Wilson, totally different playbook. They saw a potential German victory as a direct threat. They believed America had to take a hard line to make sure it could shape the world after the war was over. So why was Wilson so confrontational? It's easy to look at his policy and think it's all about idealism, defending the rights of neutral countries. But if we look closer, like historians have, a much deeper, more calculated strategic game comes into focus. This was a high-stakes chess match for America's place in the 20th century. So you have to ask, right? Was Wilson's tough stance really just about the principle of being able to sail the high seas freely? Or was he looking at a much, much bigger picture? One that had less to do with international law and a whole lot more to do with the future balance of global power. And here it is, Wilson's deepest fear. In his own words, he wasn't afraid of a German invasion of New York. He was afraid of what America would have to become to defend itself in a world dominated by a victorious Germany. He feared the U.S. would have to transform into a permanent military state, a change he believed would be absolutely fatal to American democracy. So when you put all the pieces together, Wilson's logic unfolds in four pretty clear steps. First, he's terrified of a victorious expansionist Germany. Second, he calculates that the Allies, with all their resources, are probably going to win in the long run. Third, he desperately wants a leading role in designing the peace that comes next. So, fourth, he uses the whole submarine issue as leverage, a way to get in good with the winning side and earn the credibility he needs to build a new world order. But look, the story of America's path to war wasn't just happening in the White House. While the politicians were debating, thousands of ordinary Americans were already making their own choices, getting involved long before the government made any official declaration. Officially, America's policy was neutrality. But on the ground, oh man, the reality was way messier. From the very beginning, thousands of Americans were already tangled up in the conflict, not as a nation, but as individuals, driven by their convictions, a sense of adventure, or just plain old compassion. And the variety of this involvement was just incredible. I mean, we're talking about volunteer ambulance drivers on the Western Front, journalists reporting from the trenches, doctors and nurses saving lives in field hospitals, and philanthropists back home raising millions for relief efforts. These were the actions of American citizens, not the American government. And here's the crucial part. This work was overwhelmingly pointed toward helping the Allies. It wasn't impartial at all. Historians call this a cultural mobilization. It basically forged these powerful moral and emotional bonds that pulled the American public, bit by bit, toward the Allied cause, long before the first official American shot was even fired.
This cultural shift wasn't just happening abroad either. Back home, the war triggered this massive and often really contradictory transformation inside the country itself. It created this tense tug of war between advancing equality on one hand and suppressing liberty on the other. And this created a fascinating paradox. On one hand, the war effort gave a huge boost to the women's suffrage movement and even led to the birth of the ACLU. But on the other hand, it brought on this massive government propaganda machine, something called coercive volunteerism, where you were pressured to buy war bonds to prove you're a patriot, and some really severe crackdowns on free speech. It was a time of both progress and repression, all at once. So, yeah, it's pretty clear the story of America in World War I is incredibly complex. And you know what? Our understanding of it is constantly evolving as historians keep digging deeper, moving us way beyond those old, simpler narratives.
So the old story you might have learned in school, the one about high-minded ideals and protecting neutral rights, that's not the whole picture. Not even close. The new story, the more complete story we've been exploring here, is way more complex. It's a story driven by cold, hard, strategic calculations, and it was shaped just as much by individual actions and massive social changes as it was by any presidential decisions.
So, why does this forgotten war still matter so much today? Well, because the core debates that define that whole era, they're still very much with us. They never really went away.
At its heart, America's struggle with World War I was about defining its place in the world. How much should it get involved in global conflicts, and what liberties might it have to sacrifice at home in the name of security abroad? This is a fundamental tension that, honestly, America has been wrestling with ever since.
And that leaves us with a final thought. Wilson's greatest fear was that an external threat would force America to betray its own ideals in the name of self-preservation. A century later, in a world full of all new kinds of threats, that question is as urgent as it has ever been. Is his fear still our own?